Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a book review of Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. This book, if I could give it 1,000,000 stars, I would. It's amazing. It surprised me because it's set over 5 days, I believe it is, during a battle. I'm not really one for kind of huge battle scenes. I don't mind them. I think Joe Abercrombie writes them incredibly well. I think John Gwynne writes them particularly well as well. So I don't mind reading it by these authors, but otherwise I'm not really a huge fan of kind of battle scenes and war and all of this. But the whole premise of this book is based on that. It's set over 5 days. You have the first part, which is pre-battle, and then you have the 3 main days where the battle actually occurs, and each one of those is a part. And then you have the final part, which is set after the battle. This is definitely my favorite out of the standalones that I've read so far. I've read Best Served Cold and now I've read Heroes, and then shortly I'll be reading Red Country. It does yet another incredible job developing characters in an incredibly intricate yet believable way. Even though, you know, it's a standalone, you get so much growth from the characters as the story progresses. So I'm gonna go into kind of positives and negatives. There aren't many negatives, if I'm being honest, because this book to me was very, very, very near to perfection. Once I've gone through these things, I will do a quick summary at the end. In terms of positives, so one of the main things that I loved about this story in particular is that as normal, you have your 3 main POVs. You have Gorst, Calder, and Craw. And Gorst, if you don't remember from the first original trilogy, he is the person that fights Jezzel in the fencing ring. And then you have Calder, who is the son of Bethod. He's the second son of Bethod. And then you have Craw, who is a Northman. And then he kind of runs his own little group. All 3 characters, it's one of those kind of rare instances, and I think, again, this is something that Joe Abercrombie does incredibly well, is that all the main POVs I loved, I adored, I wanted to read them. I was looking forward to every single one. Out of the 3 of them, my favorite was Calder. I think the way that he's presented in the trilogy, he's kind of presented as a little bit simple and a bit of a brute, but he's actually very intelligent and very political, and his wittiness comes across incredibly well. And I was rooting for him, even though him and Logan had their issues. The 3 main POVs, I love them all. Calder was my favorite, but only marginally so. Gorst was a close second, and then Craw was also awesome, but I really, really liked Calder because he's just so unapologetically himself, which I kind of love. The other thing relating to POVs is that there would be these chapters where you would kind of have your long kind of battle scenes. So you'd actually have the perspective of somebody who was fighting, or, you know, they were about to attack, you know, whatever it is. Abercrombie does something which I don't think he's done in any of his books. And it's where, like, you would have a POV, you would follow that POV for a page or 2, and then something would happen to that POV, so they would get killed, and then it would swap to the person who killed them, and then you would follow that character for a page or 2. That person inevitably died, and then you would follow that character for a page or 2. And it was just this really beautiful domino effect where you would follow one character, and then by the end of the chapter, you would have followed like 5 or 6 different characters. And you kind of see this really interesting knock-on effect of what happens during war that you don't necessarily really think about, right? Like, the killer becomes the killed, and it's this kind of chain reaction. And as usual, Abercrombie writes battle incredibly well. Having those changing POVs was really well done. The other thing that he does really well within that is that you follow a mixture of kind of insignificant characters, but then you also follow some of the main POVs too. So you're kind of getting a little bit of everything from both sides as well, which is nice. You kind of get the side of the Union, and then you get the side of the Northmen. That was amazingly done. The second thing is the pacing. This book kept me on my toes the whole time. So I gave Best Served Cold 5 stars as well. I've given every Joe Abercrombie book 5 stars. And Best Served Cold for me, and I know Leslie had the same thing as well, the ending started to get a little bit repetitive. Like, the last 2 parts of Best Served Cold maybe got a touch repetitive. I mean, ultimately I didn't mind, but because each part is kind of a version of the one before, it did start to get a little bit repetitive. That did not happen here, even though it's set during a battle where you would kind of think it would get repetitive after a while. It didn't at all. And the pacing was very well done. I mean, Joe Abercrombie does pacing very well. The pacing never felt slow, even in the kind of quiet moments that he does so well. It didn't feel slow. It was additive to the story. After I finished it, I wanted more. Like, I want him to write another very battle-focused novel. Like, honestly, it was so well done. The other thing, which is very characteristic of Abercrombie's works, is this kind of constant battle that you have with these morally grey characters of doing what is right versus what's wrong. I mean, all of his books explore that, right? It's one of the reasons why I love his books and why his books are so loved by so many people. But this one in particular, there's some really interesting kind of moral questions that come up, especially when it comes to, you know, kind of defending your own and defending your kind. And I really liked Craw's storyline for that in particular, because he is a Northman, but then he's also fighting other Northmen who are fighting on the Union side, like Dogman's guys. I don't know, you can kind of feel his inner battle around, like, is what he is doing, is it actually worth anything? Is anything that any of them doing worth anything? Or is it just kind of redundant at the end of the day? And then he comes to a really interesting conclusion, which I'm not going to spoil because you should go and read it and find out for yourself. It's so funny, he kind of comes full circle. I think that's something that Joe Abercrombie does incredibly well. He kind of has these cyclical narratives where you kind of come full circle at the end of the book from where you were at the start. And I think Craw in particular, his narrative is very cyclical. I think with Calder doesn't give a shit about anyone. He's happy doing his political machinations. He's happy screwing people over. There's even a point where he's considering murdering somebody who's very close to him. Like, he doesn't care. He wants to be king. He wants to be powerful, and he wants to rule. And he's unapologetic about that, which, as I mentioned before, I love that about him. But even he kind of has this inner battle around kind of certain things. Again, I don't want to spoil it because you should just go and read it. But he does have this inner struggle around what he should and shouldn't do and what implications that will have on the people around him. And I think that's explored extremely well. Gorst, I haven't really talked about Gorst that much, but Gorst's perspective was my second favourite. You need to read Best Served Cold to understand his perspective in Heroes. Something happens essentially in Best Served Cold, which means he is not in favour of the king. And so he's kind of on this arc of trying to redeem himself and trying to prove himself. And he does that almost at the cost of his own identity. And it's really fascinating how he kind of comes to terms with who he is and the way things have turned out for him. And I've really, really liked that. As always, Abercrombie deals with different themes extremely well, and the way that those characters represent those themes is super satisfying. The last thing I'm going to mention in terms of positives is the Easter eggs. There's lots of Easter eggs in this book. I think even more so than in Best Served Cold, actually. There was a lot of Easter eggs around certain characters in the First Law trilogy, and it was just so good. It just felt like I was coming home and that I was seeing I don't necessarily want to call them my friends, but, you know, I was reading about my friends and people that I really enjoy reading about. So that was really cool. And I think he did it really well. It never felt forced. It was all very kind of subtle. And that's why I think you have to read it in publication order, because otherwise you're going to be missing out on so much of the world if you just pick up, you know, the standalones without the context of the First Law trilogy. So let's move on to issues that I had with the book. There were only two. One of them, I was talking to Klaus about this and I agreed with him. I didn't actually really remember it. And then when he raised it, I totally agreed with him. And that there are moments where things work out a little bit too well, right? There's one part that I'm specifically talking about, which I'm not going to mention because, again, I don't want to give spoilers, but towards the kind of end of the book, so it's in part 4, something happens and it doesn't happen in the way that you kind of anticipate it to happen. It felt a little bit too easy. Abercrombie books are the complete opposite of that. Nothing feels easy. The stakes are super high all the time. But in that instance, it felt too good to be true almost. So that was like one downside. I mean, I still found that ending super satisfying. And then the second one is really just personal preference. There is a character who you get a POV in the original trilogy, not a main character, but one of the kind of side POVs. If you've read the book, you'll know who I'm talking about. But I wish we had just spent more time with him. He's one of the Northmen, in case you're trying to guess. He's one of the Northmen, and I just wish we'd had more time with him and that he'd been given more screen time. But I can also kind of understand why Abercrombie didn't want to, because it's not a book about them. You know, we follow him in the First Law trilogy. So I feel like maybe I'm just being fussy, but I love that character so much, so I did kind of miss him. So those are my two kind of gripes with the book, but as you can probably tell, they didn't impact my overall experience of the book. So I gave the book 1 million stars, gave the book 5 stars. I read it in about 30 hours and I was blown away yet again by his ability to write such phenomenal characters. He does get better with every single book. I was thinking about my overall rankings of First Law so far. So I've now read up to Heroes, Red Country I'm hopefully going to start soon. So in terms of kind of where I place Heroes, in terms of my overall ranking of the books that I've read so far, Before They Are Hanged is my favourite book. The quest that happens in that book is pure genius. And then my second favourite book is now Heroes. So Heroes has now been bumped up and it's a close second to Before They Are Hanged. Actually, I don't know if it's a close second. Before They Are Hanged is just phenomenal. It's honestly perfection, that book. Anyway, I'm really curious to hear if you've read this book. Please let me know your thoughts. I really want to talk to you about it because it's amazing and it's super fresh in my mind. I just can't wait for more and more people to read it. And I will probably do a reread of it maybe towards the end of this year. Early next year, I might do the audiobook. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will speak to you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.